Well, I almost wore my swimsuit to church this morning. And we're so happy to be here with all of you, and I'm going to be down here this morning. Going to get a little bit close and personal, so I used to tell my teens in the youth group, if you're in the front two rooms, you might be in the spray zone, okay? And it's appropriate because it's Surf Shack, it's the Surf and Safari. I don't know what the actual VBS is called, but something like that. It's Father's Day, and I had talked to my dad this morning. He called me, he woke me up, and I thought it was my alarm, so I shut it off. And I woke up, and I looked over, and I said, oh, my dad called me. My dad has been a pastor in the Church of the Nazarene for years, and is a district superintendent now in upstate New York, and has been such an encouragement and a blessing to me over these last few months as Elise and I have been on this journey with you. I'm sure all of you at some point have had a job transition. This is a little bit different, you know. Your church is part of your heart, you know. And as much as we have loved where we have been, we feel our hearts cleaving to yours over these last couple of months. And you know, when we came the first time to visit, that was not the last time when we preached, but when we came the first time, I said, oh, this is a great city. I love this place. It seems like an awesome church. And then we went home for a couple weeks and came back for the week that I interviewed with your board and then preached here on Sunday morning. And coming in, you know, you have all these thoughts and apprehensions. Is this the right thing to do? Is this the wrong thing to do? Is this where God is leading? And as we were flying in, you know, seeing the mountains and seeing the city and then walking into the church, it was just an incredible, incredible feeling of God's presence being over this place and over our lives. So as I'm talking through all of those things with my dad, I'm just, you know, encouraged so greatly. He broke up on the phone, and by broke up, I mean he started crying on the phone. You know, for a pastor who's been a pastor his whole life to see his son coming and doing this now, it's a very, very special thing for me that Father's Day is the day that I get to come here and deliver my first message as your pastor. It's a pretty cool thing. And so we're really, really thrilled to be here. Thank you again for all of everything that you have done, from the food pounding to just welcoming us and saying hello. I'm trying really hard on your names, I promise, but you're going to have a little bit of grace with me. I told somebody earlier, y'all can cheat because you can just say pastor, right? So if you forget my name, it's easy. You just say pastor. I'll just say ma'am or sir or something. I don't know. But I love a good dad joke. Anybody love a good dad joke? You know, dads always have this thing. My grandfather, my mom's dad, he used to always wake up, and he's a farmer, so he barely said anything. Like, he just sit there and he had this look on his face, like, you know, all the time. And he was a great, great man. But he would go and sit at the breakfast table, probably 5 a.m., because that's what time he was used to getting up his whole life. And you'd go and you'd sit down at the table, and he'd look at you and just stare at you for probably 30 seconds before saying anything. And I'd say, Grandpa, what's up? And he'd say, it's a good day for a race. And we'd say, what are you talking about? He's like, what race? And he says, the human race. He just had a million jokes. He used to do the Hertz donut. Did anybody ever hear that one? He'd say, you want a Hertz donut? And we'd say, what does that mean? And he'd punch you in the arm. He'd say, Hertz donut. Did you, you know, I'm guessing some of you are going to go out for lunch with your fathers, hopefully. And I was looking for some restaurant recommendations. And did you guys hear about the restaurant on the moon? It's great food, but has no atmosphere. Okay, terrible atmosphere. You know, the other day I thought about going on an all-almond diet. When I asked Elise about it, she said, that's just nuts. Okay, don't do that. Or this is one of my favorites. I looked these up on the internet, I must confess, okay? I looked these up on the internet. One of my favorites, I'll ask you, do you guys want to hear a joke about paper? You wouldn't want to hear it because it's terrible. So, okay? So this Sunday, I know, I'm just getting them all out of the way, all right? So this Sunday, if your father, if you're in the car with your father and you're backing out of the driveway before he has a chance to say it, you say, oh, going in reverse really takes me back, okay? You can cut him off. Be sure to let your dad know that you used to be addicted to the hokey pokey, but you turned yourself around, okay? And the next time your dad asks if you're all right, say, I'm not, but I'm actually all left. I'm good, so, all right? Father's Day, I love it. A good dad joke just cracks me up. Did you hear the one about the son? You wouldn't understand because it's over your head. So, I'm sorry. This is bad. The father figure is an important person in pop culture too. If you look and watch a movie or see a TV show, the father figure is always either a very influential person or they're just totally not in the picture. Have you ever noticed that? The father figure is always really important, or you just don't know anything about them. They're just not there. Whether it's a father who's trying their best to raise a thoughtful child on their own, maybe like in Beauty and the Beast or Cinderella, or a father who has maybe abandoned his family, like in the song Cats in the Cradle, or in the TV show, this is from my childhood, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, all right? That's right, even the Fresh Prince, the most goofiest show of all time, had a story about fatherhood abandonment. In preparations for this sermon, I was Googling some impactful father-child relationships, and the story of The Lion King popped up on YouTube when I was Googling this. Now, this came out in 1994, so I was about 6 years old when this movie came out, and I was watching, it said this is a story about fatherhood and in the Disney movies, and they don't go and do this, because I did it, but I went back and watched the scene where Simba loses his father. And as a child, when I was 6 years old and the dad, Mufasa, died in that moment, it was like the most shocking, terrible thing that ever happened in my life, right? I had a good family and good parents, but it's an impactful thing. The music, as soon as it started playing, I was like taken back to like 6-year-old Cam crying on the couch, right? In fact, more than half of Disney movies, 56 out of 107 Disney movies made, including 10 of the last 21 films that Disney Corporation has produced, feature a main character who is without one or both of their parents. This main character, they're always battling against their tortured past. They're trying to redeem themselves of this hurtful situation. They either have been completely abandoned, or they have a single parent who is trying their best to raise a well-adjusted child and sometimes falling short. The story, if you know why, Walt Disney, the first movie that he produced, I believe it was Cinderella or Snow White. I always get those two confused. But the first movie that he produced was a smash hit, and he and his brother made tons and tons of money. His family had been poor, and so he went and he bought his parents a brand new house. And a year after he bought it, the furnace malfunctioned, and both of his parents passed away in the home that he had bought. And so you can see that parents have a crazy, powerful influence on a person's life. Just look at that 56 out of 107 movies made by this corporation, one that we all have seen, a Disney movie, are featuring a main character who is without a parent. It clearly had an impact on Walt Disney's life, and it has an impact on our lives as well. You can look up a lot of statistics, and I looked some of them up, but I didn't want to share them today because it's hurtful to read these statistics that children who grow up in a home without a parent have a much harder time in life. I think we could all say that. Maybe some of you are in that situation, and you've had some big barriers to get over in your life. I know that when we read the Bible, when we read Scripture, we can find a few examples of powerful, impactful fathers. And one of those is Father Abraham. You may remember as a kid singing that song, Father Abraham had many sons. Yeah, let's not do it because it'll be stuck in our heads all week long, okay? But you remember hearing about Father Abraham. Well, over the next couple of weeks, we're jumping into a series, Abraham, Look to the Stars, okay? So for the next couple of weeks, we're going to be talking about Father Abraham. When you think about Father Abraham, I want us to think about his father as well. So how did Abraham get to the point where he is at? Abraham is an incredible figure in the Bible, perhaps one of the most influential post-flood characters that you can learn about. If you went to anybody on the street and said, name someone from the Bible, they'd probably say Jesus. They might say Moses. They might say Noah. They'd probably say Abraham. In fact, Abraham is considered the father of 3 of the world's largest religions. Did you know that? He's considered the father of Christianity, okay, because he is kind of really the start of the lineage of Jesus. Now we go back further than that, but the story of the Hebrew people starts with Abraham. He's considered the father of Islam. You know, his son Ishmael that he had with Hagar is considered one of the ancestors of Muhammad from Islam. And he's considered one of the fathers of Judaism as well. So between those three, you have a vast majority of people who have a religious faith of some sort claiming Abraham as one of the fathers of their religion. It's pretty impressive, pretty incredible. In the New Testament, Abraham is called the father of righteousness. Wow, how would you like that title, dads? I'm the father of righteousness. And have your kids refer to you as that. This incredible person. He must be a pretty important guy. So that's what we're going to do for these next couple of weeks. We're going to talk about the person of Abraham. But as I said, I want to talk about his father. So let's look at Genesis chapter 12. And in Genesis chapter 12, right off the beginning, we read this. The Lord said to Abram, "Leave your land, your family, and your father's household for the land that I will show you." Okay, so that first verse says, "Leave your father's household." In verse 2, it goes on to say, "I will make you a great nation and will bless you. I will make your name respected, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. Those who curse you, I will curse. All the families of the earth, will be blessed because of you." So here, God is putting a big calling on Abraham's shoulders. In fact, at this time, he's known as Abram, okay? So his name's not yet Abraham. I'm probably going to have to correct myself in doing that today, but his name's not yet Abraham, it's Abram. All right? So here we have a big calling in Abram's life. He's saying, your name is going to be made great. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you. Your name will be respected, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who curse you. All the families of the earth will be blessed because of you. And I want to look at that first verse. It says, the Lord said to Abram. In fact, the verse there, and the verb there, the Lord said, is actually a Hebrew word which is pronounced weomer. Weomer is pronounced that way. And the better translation of that word said would be had said. So sometimes we say, I said to Elise, can you pick up milk on the way home? When we say I had said, it denotes an even more past tense kind of idea in our minds. So the Lord had said to Abram. So when we read chapter 12, verse 1, and we read the Lord said to Abram, a lot of times we read that thinking that the Lord came to Abram in this moment and said, Abram, leave your land, your family, and your father's household for the land that I will show you. But really, this is something that God had already said to Abram. Anybody ever been called or asked or felt like God was leading you to do something, and there may be a moment where you finally obeyed and did it, but for like months before that, you're kind of thinking in your head, oh, is this really what God wants me to do? Is this really what I should do? I'll be honest with you, that was kind of me coming here to be your pastor at Roanoke First. The first time that we visited, or when Dr. Fuller first called me and said, hey, would you be interested in doing this? And he told me a little bit about you all and about your church. I thought, oh, this could be really cool. This could be great. And then I immediately went home and started thinking, oh man, is that really what I'm supposed to do? God, is this what I'm supposed to do? And then we came and visited for the first time, and it was reconfirmed again. But then we went back to Indianapolis and started thinking, is this really what you want us to do, God? And that's just natural. That's natural for us as humans to do that. The Lord had said to Abram. But here in chapter 12 is really the first time that we ever talk to Abram. So let's look back into Genesis chapter 11 and see what's actually going on here. Let's look at Genesis chapter 11. It says this in 11:10, these are Shem's descendants. Shem, by the way, is Noah's son. All right, so one of the guys who's on the ark. When Shem was 100 years old, he became the father of Arpachshad, 2 years after the flood. Now, I'm going to skip all of this, but if you look in your Bible, there is about probably a whole page of people who begat somebody, who begat somebody, who begat somebody, okay? So we have all that lineage, but then we get to verse 24, and it says this, when Nahor was 29 years old, he became the father of Terah. After Terah was born, Nahor lived another 119 years, and he had other sons and daughters. When Terah was 70 years old, he became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. These are Terah's descendants. Okay, so we see that Terah is the father of Abram. And when we continue to read into verse 27, it says, these are Terah's descendants. Terah became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Haran became the father of Lot. And Haran died while his father Terah was in his native land, in the Ur of the Chaldeans. Abram and Nahor both married. Abram's wife was Sarai, and Nahor's wife was Milcah, the daughter of Haran, father of both Milcah and Iscah. These are a lot of crazy names, huh? By the way, I'll tell you a little preacher's trick here. When you've got all these strange names to pronounce, you just go fast, okay? You go fast and you don't stop, because the moment that you stop and think about how to pronounce that name is the moment that you pronounce it incorrectly or you stutter on it, okay? So I'll tell you, this is a secret of Pastor Cam here, and so you'll remember this, that I may know how to pronounce these names or I may not, okay? Fake it till you make it, baby, all right? Fake it till you make it. Sarai was unable, in verse 30, Sarai was unable to have children. Terah took his son Abram, his grandson Lot, son of Haran, and his son Abram's wife Sarai, his daughter-in-law, and they left the Ur of the Chaldeans for the land of Canaan, and arriving at Haran, they settled there. Terah lived 205 years, and he died in Haran. Now, you probably all just zoned out while I was reading that, and that's okay, because this is just kind of a little bit of a boring thing to read. We're saying, well, this person had this person, and then they had other sons and daughters, and then they did this, and then they did that. And it's really easy to just kind of gloss over all of these things. But there's a lot of truth buried in here. So let's go back and just do it a little bit slower. So we know who Terah is. He's Abram's father. We know that he had 3 sons. We know that one of those sons died. What's pretty incredible in verse 28, it says that Haran, who by the way was the oldest son of these 3, died while with his father Terah in his native land. Y'all have heard somebody say this before, and I've heard it said to me before, that a parent should never see one of their children pass away. So why are we seeing this here? Because this has an incredible impact on Terah's life. This is his oldest son. Now, that would be sad for any of us, but in this culture, the eldest son was held up and revered among his siblings, among the family. The eldest son would inherit everything that the father had worked for. The eldest son would carry on the family business. The eldest son would do all of these things, would be his father's legacy. Guys, you know what I mean? As much as we may not like to admit it, men, we want to leave some sort of legacy in our lives. Okay, I'm sure women do too. We want to leave a legacy in our lives. And for these people in this culture, your eldest son was your legacy. And it says here in verse 28 that Haran, his eldest son, died while with him in the place that they were from. I'll go ahead and add here, and it doesn't say this in the Bible, but you know that if that father had been there when his son was dying, he would have been holding him right there in his arms. So we can imagine that here is Terah holding his son Haran in his arms while he's losing his life. That's going to hurt somebody. That's going to have an impact. So Terah is a kind of a tortured individual. He's been through some really tough things. He's faced some hard things. And he has these 2 other sons. One named Nahor, who married and had his own children, and so he wasn't worried about him. But Abram and his wife, Sarai, couldn't have children. And so you can imagine that if your one son had kind of moved out of the house, started his own life, and your other son, your eldest son, had passed away, and you had this one son who now couldn't have children, you would probably turn all of your attention to that son. Try and pour into him, invest in him. And so that's what Terah does. And in chapter 12, when we read, the Lord had said to Abram, you better believe that Abram had talked with his dad about that calling. And so we continue to read, and it says that Terah took Abram and Sarai, and he took his nephew Lot, Haran's son, who had passed away, and they left the land that they were from. They left Ur of the Chaldeans for the land of Canaan. And arriving at Haran, they settled there. Terah lived another 205 years, and he died in Haran. So the first thing that I want us to remember about these verses is that Terah had lost his son. The second thing is that he would have known about Abram's great calling, and now he would be invested deeply in Abram's life. And the third thing is this, that they left the Ur of the Chaldeans. Now, Ur was like the place to be. Okay? Ur would be like New York City or something like that. It'd be like the best place you could possibly live. They had everything that you would want there. It was a rich place. There was great farmland. It was a big city. And there would have been no reason for anyone to leave Ur of the Chaldeans. It was a great place to be. It'd be kind of like if you were living here in Roanoke in the city and you had everything around you and you just went out in the hills somewhere, okay? And you just went there and you weren't around anybody. So why would Terah leave Ur of the Chaldeans? Because he was following God's call in his son's life. So you can imagine if Abram came to his dad and said, Dad, I'm feeling like God is asking me to step out and do these things. He would have been really respectful of that because his father had just lost a son. What do you think about this, Dad? And his dad says, okay, let's do it. And they go. They leave Ur of the Chaldeans, but it says this, they were heading to Canaan. Well, we all know the name Canaan is the promised land, right? The land that for the rest of the Old Testament, the Hebrew people are trying to get there. But they keep running into all these roadblocks. The whole Egypt thing, the Pharaoh. Remember, they wandered in the desert for all these years. They're trying to get to Canaan. So they head out. And guess what? This whole thing, like the whole Old Testament, could have been abridged and just stopped here if they had just gone to Canaan. Right? But they didn't. They stopped in Haran. Now you may be saying, Haran, didn't we just hear that name? That's right. The name Haran of the city that they stopped in was the same name of the son that had died in Terah's arms. Can you imagine with me if you had watched your son by the name of Haran die, and then you left the city that you were from, and you were just journeying, you were trying to be faithful to what God was calling your son to do, or calling you to do, and then you walked into this village that had the exact same name as the son who had just died. What an incredible, profound impact that might have on you. It would bring back all of those memories, all of those bad feelings, all of those difficult things and difficult times. And what happened is they stopped. They stopped because when things got hard, they quit. You know that Haran was 600 miles away from Ur of the Chaldeans. They only had another 400 miles to go before they got to Canaan. They'd already gone more than halfway, but they got stuck. They got stopped. They didn't make it. It's an incredible thing to read this passage and understand the implications of this. Imagine with me if Abram had just been faithful and had just gone. If he had just gone and hadn't worried about what his dad thought and hadn't worried about the pain and the hurt in his life. Imagine with me if instead of stopping in Haran, they had just kept going and they had gotten to Canaan. As I already said, the whole Old Testament, those 40 years, the plagues in Egypt, all that kind of stuff, it wouldn't have ever had to happen. They would have made it to Canaan and God would have been able to work out what he was trying to do in his people there in that place without all of that pain, without all of that hurt, without everything that we will read about. They would have made it. They both knew that God was calling them to something much bigger than themselves, and yet they allowed their heartache over their loss to delay the plan that God had set in motion. God asked them to do something big, and their pain got in the way. It's almost as if Terah said, son, if God is telling you to go to Canaan, let's go to Canaan, son. If that's what God is calling you to do, let's do it. Then along the journey, he takes command. He takes over and says, you know what, Abram? I think we're just going to stay here. You know, things are really hard. They have been hard. We're just going to stay in Haran. I think this is what God wanted. I don't think he really wanted us to go to Canaan. I think he just wanted us to come to this point. Abram knew that that wasn't true because we read that, if you continue reading, that we know that as soon as Terah died, he left. As soon as Terah died, they left. Do you want to know something? They were in Haran for 50 years. For 50 years, they stayed in that town. Abram had a calling that God had placed on his shoulders. And instead of following that calling, he stayed there with his dad for 50 years. Boy, I tell you what, when I know God is putting something on my heart or on my mind, and if I turn my back on it, that pain is heavy. You know, if God nudges you on the shoulder and says, hey, you got to go down to the altar and pray today. Sometimes that happens when you're at church, right? You got to go down to the altar and pray today. If you decide not to do that, you know as well as I do that when you walk out of the doors of that church, you're going to go get lunch somewhere. You're going to go back to your house that afternoon, and the rest of the week you're going to be thinking, I should have gone down to the altar and prayed. But then guess what? It's good news is you get to come back to church the very next week and you can do it. Abram couldn't. 50 years they stayed in Haran. 50 years. How many things in the future of Abram's life were affected? Think about it. He could have gone when God told him to, and yet he didn't. The whole thing with Hagar probably wouldn't have happened. The whole thing with Ishmael probably wouldn't have happened. All this pain and hurt in his life. Just as Abram followed his father's personal grief and opinion to delay what God was hoping to do in and through his life, we prevent God sometimes from working in and through our lives because of our stuff. Because of our personal grief, opinions, feelings, or goals. Take, for example, Elise and myself. I sent a letter out to most of you, and in that letter I shared a little snippet of something really, really interesting. This was before we had interviewed with the board. It was before we had lunch with you all over at the Family Life Center. It was before I came here and preached. We were walking. It was about 5 minutes after we walked in the front door of the church for the first time. And we were walking, and Becky, I think, was in front of us, and she had turned the corner. I don't know where you are, Becky, but you're here somewhere. She had turned the corner, and it was just Elise and I in the little hallway right here as you come into the foyer and those glass doors. And I turned to her and I said, "This is it." But imagine in that moment, if instead of following God's call to come here and be your pastor, if I had said, "You know what? But she has a really good job in Indianapolis," and she did. Imagine if I had said, "All of my best friends live in Indianapolis," and they do. Imagine if I had said, "My brother," guys, let me tell you that because my family is in ministry, I have never lived in the same city. Let me back up. I have never lived in the same state. Let me back up. I have never lived in the same region as anybody in my family since I graduated from high school. And my brother, 2 years ago, I think like 2 years and 6 months ago, moved to Indianapolis. But imagine if I had said, "My brother's here," and I hadn't come to be your pastor. I would have been miserable because I knew this is what God was calling us to do. I knew this is where God was leading. And when God leads, when God asks you to do something, you do it. You have to. Because there's nothing else in this world that should matter as much as Him. There's nothing else in this world that should matter as much as people who need to know Him. There's nothing in this world that matters as much as people, as going and being a part of helping those people come to know Him. Yet God was leading us here, and He showed His hand in multiple ways. I don't want to get into the details, but after I graduated, I grew up in a small town in rural Indiana. About 15,000 people lived there. And I'll tell you this, that my high school was over 2,000 people, and it was 98.9% white people, okay? We had more Native Americans than we did any other minority in the town that I grew up in. And yet God led me to Shepherd Community Center in Indianapolis, into a very diverse neighborhood, and He taught me some incredible things about inner city and urban ministry in that place. And then a few years later, God called me to Indianapolis First Church of the Nazarene, same kind of setting. He's been placing this call for the city in my heart. And so it's pretty amazing that now the door opens at Roanoke First to come and be your pastor and serve here in this neighborhood, serve here in this great city that's reaching people. There are a lot of barriers that I could have said, "No, we can't do this, we shouldn't do this." One of those is that we bought a house a year and 4 months ago. And I'm thinking, "Oh, that was a really dumb move. Way to go. Why'd you guys buy that house?" But let me tell you this, and I won't get into the nitty-gritty details, but that house sold for so much more than what we bought it for. We broke even by $53 on our home when we sold it. And we sold it a year and 4 months after we bought it. That's paying down payments, that's paying realtors, that's doing all that stuff. And I look at those things and I say, "Lord, you have totally blessed us. You have worked this out. You have made this possible." And can you imagine if I had just stepped back and said, "Nope, we're going to stay"? It would be killing me. In fact, it would be downright sinful to have done that. 100% sinful to have done that. Yet I knew God was leading us here, so we had to do it. It's just what you have to do. You know, everybody is called to something. Everyone is called to something. Now, some of you may be thinking, well, I'm not called to anything that special. I'm not called to anything that big. Some of you might be called to be a pastor, right? So maybe God is putting that on your heart to be a pastor, whether you're preaching or children's ministry or youth ministry or whatever it might be. God might be pressing that on your heart, but God is calling each and every one of us to something. In your neighborhood, your area, your work, whatever it may be, God is giving you blessings and gifts, abilities. If you're an accountant, he's given you those accounting abilities so that you could go to a work at a place as an accountant and reach people for Jesus there. See, it's not always a burning bush. It's not always a burning bush when God calls us. It's faithfulness in these three ways, and you can bring up that slide. In these three ways. God does not always call us to something specific, but he calls every believer to love him, love others, and help others love him. He calls every believer to do that. So right now I want to ask you, are you fulfilling this calling, or are you stuck in Haran? Are you stuck in that place where all of those things from your past are preventing you from being able to do those things that God is asking you to do? A lot of times, especially when I was working with teenagers as a youth pastor, they would ask me, how do I know God's plan for my life? I say, well, what do you think God's plan for your life is? I mean, not just like specifically, but how does that work? They said, well, first I'm going to go to this college, and then I'm going to major in this, and then I'm going to graduate, and I'm going to marry this person, and I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da, all down the line. I think sometimes something bad happens to us in life, and someone will say, God works in mysterious ways, it's all part of his plan. I don't think so. This is God's plan for our lives. This is God's plan for our lives. Whatever you may do as a job, wherever you may be in your home or where you live, whatever neighborhood, whatever city, whoever your friends may be, God has put you in that situation for a reason and a purpose. And that reason and purpose is to love him, love others, and help others love him. And so I want to ask you, are there barriers in your life right now that are preventing you from doing that? We'll start with the first question. Is there something in your life that is preventing you from loving God? Is there sin in your life? Is there anger? Is there hatred? Is there frustration? Is there confusion that's keeping you from loving God? Second, is there something that's keeping you from loving others? Maybe someone looks different than you. Maybe they smell a little bit different. Maybe they talk a little bit differently than you. Is there something that's keeping you from loving others the way that God has loved you? Because guess what? God loves you, and that's a pretty big feat in and of itself, okay? So if he can love you, then you ought to love others the same way that he loves you, no matter what they look like, no matter who they are, no matter what they say, okay? No matter what they dress like. If they're walking down Highland Avenue and their shorts are touching their shoes, okay? All right? No matter what they look like, God has called you to love them. All right? He has. It's the truth. So is there something in your mind, prejudice, or is there something in your life, busyness, or whatever, that may be keeping you from loving others? And let me tell you this, that if you're stuck in Haran on those things, then you are being downright sinful, as I said. The third is this, that we have to help others come to love him. Okay? That's the key part there. You can love God and you can love others, but it doesn't really matter a hill of beans unless you're helping them love him. Okay? Because just being nice to people, just loving everybody didn't get anybody to heaven. Okay? People loving God and having a relationship with him gets them to heaven. So I want to challenge you today. Are you doing these three things? Are you loving God the best that you can? Are you loving others the best that you can? And are you helping others come to love God the best that you can? When I was a youth pastor, I would rip my hair out, church, because I would walk into my youth group and I'd have 30-some kids there, and they all went to the biggest high schools in our state. I'm telling you that in my youth group of 30 kids, when they would go out to college or go out to high school, they would encounter all combined, over 15,000 teenagers every single day at school. And yet I couldn't get any of them to invite their friends to come to youth group. And I want to ask you, how many people do you encounter, do you see, do you say hi to, do you walk by their house, do you see at work and say, hey Jim, how's it going? Hey Stacy, how's it going? Whatever their name may be, and you just walk right by them without ever doing these three things, loving God, loving others, and helping them come to know Him. So this is a personal challenge, but it's also a church challenge. It's a challenge for Roanoke First. Are we a church that's just here to be happy and to come and sing some songs and do good things with each other and just have fun? Or are we a church that's about reaching lost people? Because it's both and. We need to do discipleship, but we also need to reach the lost. So are there things about your life and are there things about our church that maybe have us stuck in Haran? Now, I've just gotten here, so I don't know. Okay? I don't know if there are. I've got to learn these things about our church. I've got to learn Roanoke First. I've got to figure out what we're going to do as a church moving forward to continue to fulfill the mission of loving God, loving others, and helping others love Him. But those three things you can come up with a million mission statements, but nothing's going to beat that. Because that's the most important thing that you can do in life. Love God, love others, and help others come to love Him. But there may be some things in your past that you have to get over and get past. Get by. Push through. You see, Abram stayed in Haran until Terah died, and then he left. Do we want to sit around and wait 50 years before we do anything? In your life, do you want to keep walking by that person at your work who you know has been going through a tough time? Maybe you should invite him to church. Maybe you should just invite him over for dinner. Do you want to keep walking by that person in your neighborhood, that person in your school, and just keep ignoring them and thinking, oh, maybe someday? Because you don't want to wait 50 years like Abram did. You got to do it now. You got to step out now. You got to put yourself out there now. Philippians 3:13 through 15 says this, brothers and sisters, I myself don't think I've reached it yet. And he's talking about righteousness here. I myself don't think I've reached it, but I do this one thing. I forget about the things behind me, and I reach out for the things ahead of me. The goal I pursue is the prize of God's upward call in Christ Jesus. So all of us who are spiritually mature should think this way. And if anyone thinks differently, God will reveal it to him or to her. Church, I want to ask you these three questions as we close today. I want to ask you these three questions. And the first one is this. Am I loving God deeper every day? Am I striving to love Him the best that I can? And if you can ask yourself this question right now, am I loving God in the best way that I can? And I promise you, if you ask this question, just as Paul said, that God will reveal it to him or her if they are not. So if you're not loving God the best that you can, then God is going to reveal that to you. And whatever it is that is preventing you from loving Him the best that you can, you have to ask Him to help you remove that thing from your life. The second is this, am I loving others deeper every day? Is my life about fulfilling my needs and doing my things and getting my promotion or mowing my lawn or loving my family or whatever? Or is my life about loving others? Am I self-centered or others-centered? I want to challenge you, as Paul wrote, that mature Christians, people who follow after God will reveal it to them, to him or to her, if they are not doing these things. So I'm challenging you, church, right now. God will reveal in your heart and your mind and your life if there's something that is preventing you from loving others. And the last question is this, am I helping others come to know Him? Does my life lead people to Christ? Does my action at work, in my neighborhood, in my family, at church, do the things that I do have an impact on others? Do people see Jesus in me, or do they see gossiper? Do they see Jesus in me, or do they see someone who's stressed out all the time? Do they see Jesus in me, or do they see someone who's walking around with anger in their heart? Do they see Jesus in me, or do they see something else? I want to challenge you, church. I need this challenge every day. I want to ask myself these 3 questions every day that I wake up. Because I don't think that I've reached it yet, but I want to forget those things that are behind me and strive towards what is ahead of me to reach the goal of where God has called me. And for Abram, that was Canaan. And for you, it might be something else. But I want to encourage you, church, love God, love others, and help others love God. And know that if you're not doing those things, the Lord is going to reveal that to your heart and in your mind. And you've got to be willing to step out in faith and do it.